When we think about English history, the big stories usually come to mind. Endless wars with France, the drama of the Tudors, the rise of a globe-spanning empire. But what if I told you there's another story, a quieter one, hiding in plain sight? It isn't a story of conquest, but of a single, strategic marriage that secretly tethered the English crown to a world it barely knew, the Slavic heart of Europe. This isn't just about some forgotten queen. It's about how a 14th century political deal built a cultural and religious bridge that would echo through the halls of power for generations, tying an island kingdom to the legacy of a fallen Slavic empire. It's a connection that would inspire new art, challenge the church, and even shape the modern line of succession to the British throne. It all starts not with a battle, but with a teenage king in deep trouble. Picture Westminster Abbey in 1382. A wedding is underway between two 15-year-olds who've never even met. One is Richard II, England's young and embattled king. The other is a princess from a distant land, so physically small that one English chronicler called her a tiny scrap of humanity. This was Anne of Bohemia, daughter of the most powerful man in Europe, the Holy Roman Emperor Charles IV. On paper, the match looked terrible, and it was deeply unpopular. Anne brought no dowry. In fact, Richard II had to pay her brother a fortune just to get the deal done. But this marriage, born out of the chaos of a divided Catholic Church, was anything but a mistake. It was the moment England, without even realizing it, got tangled up in the long and turbulent story of the Slavs. So why this wedding? To get it, you have to understand just how messy 14th century Europe was. The entire continent was in the grip of the Western Schism, a meltdown in the Catholic Church where two different popes, one in Rome, one in Avignon, France, both claimed to be the one true leader of Christendom. England, already locked in the 100 Years' War with France, sided with the Pope in Rome. France naturally backed their guy in Avignon. The Roman Pope, Urban VI, was desperate to build an anti-French alliance. He saw his chance and sanctioned a marriage between England's King Richard II and Anne, whose father, the Holy Roman Emperor and King of Bohemia, also supported Rome. They were a logical, if very distant, ally. Back in England, almost no one was happy about it. The court had hoped for a rich bride, like a daughter of the Lord of Milan, who came with a massive dowry. Anne brought nothing. Even worse, Richard had to give her brother, King Wenceslas, a loan of 20,000 florins, an absolutely massive sum, to seal the deal. The public relations were terrible. When Anne finally arrived in England in December 1381, her welcome was frosty at best. But for young King Richard, this was a power move. He was still a teenager, desperately trying to look like a real king after the terrifying peasants' revolt of 1381. This unpopular alliance was his way of stepping onto the European stage, aligning his family with the most powerful imperial dynasty on the continent. And then, something nobody expected happened. Against all odds, the two teenagers, Richard and Anne, genuinely fell in love. For their 12 years of marriage, they were almost inseparable. When Anne died of the plague in 1394, Richard was so heartbroken, he ordered the complete demolition of the palace where she died. Her personal influence was huge, but the world she came from was about to leave an even bigger mark on England. Anne wasn't just a German princess from the House of Luxembourg. She was the Queen of Bohemia, a kingdom with a fiercely independent streak. Her father, Charles IV, had turned her home city of Prague into one of the most dazzling cultural capitals in the world, the very seat of the Holy Roman Empire. But bubbling under the surface of this medieval powerhouse was a much older story, the legacy of Great Moravia. In the 9th century, the Great Moravian Empire was the first major state of the West Slavs, a true force to be reckoned with in Central Europe. At its peak under rulers like Svatopluk I, it was a vast empire covering much of the modern-day Czech Republic, Slovakia, and parts of Poland and Hungary. This empire was a thriving center of Slavic culture. It's where the Byzantine missionaries Saints Cyril and Methodius introduced the first written language for the Slavs, the Glagolitic script, and began translating the Bible, creating a uniquely Slavic religious tradition. By the early 900s, Great Moravia had collapsed, overrun by Magyar invaders and torn apart from within. Its lands were carved up by its neighbors, and its core became the foundation of the rising Duchy of Bohemia. The dynasties that followed, including Anne's own, built their kingdom right on top of this fallen Slavic empire. So when Anne of Bohemia came to England, she wasn't just representing the Holy Roman Emperor. She carried the memory of this first great Slavic civilization in her very title. This heritage, with its long history of independent religious thought, was woven into the DNA of her kingdom, and through her it was about to connect with a growing religious rebellion in England. The marriage of Richard and Anne opened a direct highway between two of Europe's most religiously restless kingdoms. In England, an Oxford theologian named John Wycliffe was making waves. He argued that the Bible, not the Church, was the ultimate source of truth, and that people should be able to read it in their own language. His followers, nicknamed the Lollards, were attacking the Church's wealth and power, planting the very first seeds of what would become the English Reformation. Anne of Bohemia arrived right in the middle of all this. She was known to be a pious and well-read woman who brought Scripture with her in 3 different languages: Latin, Czech, and German. While she was a promoter of quiet, personal faith, the real explosion came from her entourage. The Bohemian nobles and scholars who traveled with her created a busy exchange between the universities of Prague and Oxford. Suddenly, Wycliffe's radical ideas had a direct flight path to Central Europe. Bohemian students at Oxford devoured Wycliffe's writings and took them back home to Prague. There they found very fertile ground. The old legacy of Cyril and Methodius had left behind a deep-seated suspicion of distant, centralized power, whether it was German emperors or a Roman pope. Wycliffe's ideas resonated with a Czech scholar named Jan Hus. Inspired by Wycliffe, Hus launched his own powerful reform movement, attacking church corruption and demanding the Scripture be put above all else. The link was so direct that when Hus was later put on trial, his enemies condemned him for Wycliffism. This cross-pollination of revolutionary ideas was a direct result of that royal marriage. While Anne herself wasn't an active revolutionary, her court was the crucial link that allowed English Lollardy to spark the Hussite movement in Bohemia. The Hussite Wars that followed would tear Central Europe apart for decades, but the intellectual fire was lit. A secret link, forged for political convenience, had become a pipeline for religious revolution, forever tying the English and Bohemian Reformations together. But the connection between England and Bohemia didn't die with Anne. The precedent was set. Fast forward over 200 years, and that bond came roaring back. In 1613, another English royal, Elizabeth Stuart, the daughter of King James I, married a leading German Protestant prince. 6 years later, the Protestant nobles of Bohemia, fed up with their Catholic rulers, did something dramatic. They offered the crown of their kingdom to Elizabeth's husband. He accepted, and for a short, dramatic time, Elizabeth Stuart became the Queen of Bohemia. Her reign was so short it lasted just one winter before they were crushed at the Battle of the White Mountain and forced into exile, that she's known to history as the Winter Queen. Yet this moment threw the English royal family right into the heart of the 30 Years' War, a devastating conflict rooted in those same Catholic-Protestant tensions. The marriage once again tied England's fate to the Slavic lands of Bohemia, though this time with disastrous results. But that's not the final echo. The Winter Queen's youngest daughter was a woman named Sophia of Hanover, and through the Act of Settlement of 1701, it is from Sophia that the modern British royal family traces its right to the throne, meaning the blood of Bohemia's Winter Queen flows in the veins of the Windsors today. The most surprising legacy, however, came from those religious seeds planted centuries before. The followers of John Hus, known as the Bohemian Brethren, survived centuries of persecution. In the 18th century, a renewed community of these believers, now calling themselves the Moravian Church, sought refuge in England. In a remarkable twist, after years of negotiation, the British Parliament passed the Moravian Act in 1749. This law officially recognized the Moravian Church as an ancient Protestant Episcopal church, acknowledging its direct descent from the old Bohemian reformers. The Anglican establishment itself officially recognized a church born from a Slavic reform movement, a movement sparked, in part, by an English theologian all those centuries ago. From a 14th century marriage of convenience to a 17th century Winter Queen and an 18th century Act of Parliament, the hidden connection between England and the Slavic world proved to be incredibly resilient. These are the kinds of stories that prove history is a web of incredible connections. If you find these hidden threads as fascinating as I do, let me know in the comments which other secret alliances you'd like to see explored. And if you've enjoyed this trip into the past, make sure you subscribe so you don't miss what's coming next. The story that started with a lonely Bohemian princess on English shores is so much more than a historical footnote. The marriage of Anne and Richard was a catalyst for a chain of events nobody could have seen coming. It sparked a genuine love story that helped to steady a volatile king. It created a cultural bridge that brought new ideas and art to the English court. And most importantly, it opened a channel for revolutionary ideas that linked John Wycliffe's England to Jan Hus's Bohemia, setting the stage for centuries of conflict and reform. That connection reappeared in the tragic story of the Winter Queen, whose descendants would one day rule Britain, and it found a final peaceful resolution with the official recognition of the Moravian Church on English soil. It's a powerful reminder that history is never just a series of separate events. It's a deeply woven tapestry, and a single thread, like a royal marriage, can secretly tie two different worlds together, creating a pattern you can still see centuries later if you just know where to look.